First day. All started when we moved to a new house with my mother and my two brothers. It was quite large. A second-floor house, 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room and a very large yard. Everything seemed perfect when we arrived. The neighbors were nice and the sector was quite quiet. The first day we occupied it to remodel, paint and fix some things that were in poor condition, but obviously we did not finish, so we all had to sleep in the living room gathering our mattresses. Since the rooms had a strong smell of paint, they fell asleep almost instantly since they were tired from so much work. I still couldn't sleep because I suffer from insomnia, so I was tossing and turning on the mattress until about 2 a.m. And when got bored of doing that, I decided to go to the yard for a while to try to let the fresh air relax me a bit. I walked on the long corridor to the door that led to the yard, opened it, and before I stepped outside, I saw something strange on the roof of the neighboring house. It took me a bit to react, but when did close the door immediately, and as it had glass, could see how that thing turned to look at me, and then it was silently jumping across the ceilings. At that time I was barely 14 years old, so got scared and screamed as ran to hug my mother. She, confused and sleepy, asked me why I was crying, but when I told her that I saw a dog-like creature with glowing red eyes on the ceiling, she only laughed along with my brothers, who had also been awakened by my screaming as she. I tried to convince them, but they ignored me. They only told me to try to sleep. I tried but couldn't and was scared all night as she tried to find some logic in it. Yet, there wasn't any of it. Just hoped it was only time I saw this. Second and third day. When morning came, I was very relieved as we continued with our work of remodeling. I knew the thing would not appear. Our house. At least the rooms were already painted. So first we dedicated ourselves to ordering our room each. But since the one on the ground floor was bigger, we made a division, and with my mother we stayed in it, while my brothers stayed in both above. The day passed relatively quickly, and since I didn't sleep the night before, that night did it by just putting my head on the pillow, so don't know if that thing reappeared. I hope not. On the third day we had almost everything ready, so for that reason we allowed ourselves to have a small party for having acquired that house. Mom invited my aunt, her husband and a friend. One of my brothers invited a friend, and that was it. It was something more familiar. Meal in the backyard. Laughter, congratulations from my aunt to my mother for having bought such a beautiful house, jokes between my older brothers and their friend, while I just stayed talking with my uncle in a more calm way about things at school or his work, and amid such a pleasant atmosphere time flew by. Our visitors left, and since it was almost dawn, we didn't wash the dishes, we just let them soak, and in the morning we would wash and put everything in order. Then we only had to go to sleep. Apparently my brothers and my mom didn't have much trouble, but I did. Stupid insomnia. I spent at least 2 hours trying to sleep without any success, and when was finally doing it, I heard noises in the kitchen. It was as if they were moving glasses. Must admit, it scared me, so covered myself as much as I could with the blankets, thinking like an infant that maybe that would calm everything down. But no, the noise got louder. Even at one point it seemed that one of the glasses was thrown away. That made my mother wake up immediately. I told her that for a while she was hearing those noises, so she got up to go see what was happening. I got up too. It goes without saying that the noises continued and only stopped when we got to the kitchen. In that second, both me and my mother got goosebumps, since obviously, there was no person there and there was no broken glass. Everything was just as we left it a few hours ago. We even started to think that a cat or a rat could have gotten in looking for food, but everything was closed and it was impossible. I think that, from that moment, my mother began to believe me a little about what saw 2 nights ago. We didn't have the courage to stand there and discuss it anyway, so we quickly went to our shared room and locked it and tried to go back to sleep. She costs us both, but at least we could. Well, the day after the celebration, we ordered what we occupied, and when we washed the dishes we confirmed that none of the glasses had been broken. But then why was it heard that a glass was broken? God, we had barely been in that house for 4 days and had already experienced 2 abnormal things. At least during the following days nothing strange happened. That calmed me down a lot, so much so that started to think that maybe it was all part of my great imagination. But the tranquility could not last long. We had already been a little over a month We were getting used to it and I was no longer so afraid of that big house. Although I still don't know if my family took advantage of that or if it was just a coincidence, but one day, if I remember correctly it was Wednesday, was left alone. My mother went to visit her friend who was on her birthday. One of my brothers went out with his friend. And the other I do not know where he went, but I was alone from about 5 p.m. Well, at first I liked being alone since that way I felt more calm and I could watch some series without them talking to me all the time. Also, by then we had adopted 2 dogs and that made me feel safe since my window gave a direct view of the backyard and I could see my pets so I didn't feel lonely anymore. Well, the hours went by, the sky was darkening and my fear began to reappear. For some reason something strange was felt in the environment. I wanted someone to come back soon. I even called them on their cell phone but no one answered. I had no choice but to just go to bed and continue watching movies to try to distract myself. And I don't know if it worked but at one point I felt like someone was already in one of the upstairs rooms. I was relieved. They were strong steps. It was surely my brother. Even through the window I could see that the light in the room was turned on, so Elle spoke to Rohit. That's the name of one of my brothers, but he didn't answer. I spoke again and instead of a voice response I just heard the steps. They were stronger. It was as if there were 2 people up there. What scared me the most was that my dogs stared up. God, I was beyond scared, but despite that I got up from my bed, opened the door to the backyard, brought in my pets and told them to accompany me upstairs. I remember that moment and it gives me chills. I walked slowly in case it was a thief who had entered my house. I would have preferred that to what it really was. The thing is that I armed myself with all the courage I could and pushed the door, and as it will be obvious, there was nobody there. I still don't know how it was that I didn't have a heart attack at that time. I just went in with my pets and yes, there was no one. I tried to calm myself by saying that it was my imagination, that those footsteps were never heard, that there was no one but me and my 2 dogs in the house. So I turned off the light and we went out. We still went downstairs alert and quickly went into my room. I had to leave the dogs in the backyard but I preferred that they be with me so that none of the 3 would be afraid. It didn't take long and a little calmer. Elle looked at the yard and realized that the light in the room above was on again. I could no longer deal with fear, and to top it off, the steps began to be heard again. The worst of all is that now we also heard the front door open. I no longer knew what to do. Why did all this happen when I was alone? I was about to have a heart attack when I heard footsteps in the hallway and then the doorknob turned. Luckily this time it was my mother. Finally breathed with relief and I threw myself to hug her. I told her everything that had happened. I even told her to look out the window and see that the light was still on. But what do you think? It was off and the footsteps had stopped when the door of our room was opened. I felt like she was going to call me crazy again, but she relieved me that my mom finally believed me. The rest of the night passed as if nothing. No strange noise was noticed again. None of my brothers arrived that night, but when Rohit arrived at the afternoon and I told him what he had heard, he replied that he had also been hearing things in the early mornings, more or less between 1:30 and 4:30 a.m. I did not know if it made me feel better that now they also knew what was happening or if I felt bad because there might be something wrong in the house. For some time no more paranormal things happened. That relieved us all at home. About 5 months went by without anything happening, at least until my birthday. I was still in high school at that time, so I invited 4 friends to celebrate during the night. It was like a sleepover. And how I shared a birthday with one of my brothers, Uvan. He went to celebrate with his friends. Rohit had moved in about 2 months ago with his friend. It was a bit hasty but he wanted it that way. And my mother stayed at her sister's house that night to give my friends and me more peace of mind. We didn't do anything wrong. Just a little drinks, lots of random conversations, and well, they knew what was going on at my house. That's why they came up with a joke on that topic. They said that perhaps people had died in the house and that they were not happy with having to live with strangers. They were talks of drunk and stupid teenagers, so they could only be taken as a joke, but it seems that the ghosts. It bothered because immediately the ceiling was heard creaking as if they were walking on it. It should be said that we were in the living room chatting and that my house was too big, so much so that the distance between the floor and the ceiling was approximately 6 meters high. It was not as if someone could make that joke for liven up the atmosphere, and I repeat that it was only the 5 of us in the place. My best friend, who was quite a coward, hugged me and tried to change the subject, but the creaking continued for a few more minutes and suddenly stopped. We took advantage and put on some music to calm the atmosphere and to continue chatting like a while ago. It worked. Nothing strange happened in those hours. However, it was already after 2 a.m. and 3 of my friends were somewhat drunk, so it was better to go to sleep, as Rohit had moved. Now I had stayed in his room. I turned on the hall light first and then turned off the other lights so that we could all go upstairs. It had an emergency quilt, so we all stayed in the same room. I was quite sleepy already, but my drunken friends came up again with the ghost jokes, since now we were more protected. This time nothing happened, so they had no choice but to try to fall asleep. I was already in my second dream, but in the distance I heard their laughter. They still weren't asleep, and I don't know if it was to make them shut up, but I said, if they don't sleep now, at 3 a.m. it will be worse. It seems that this calmed them down, since everything was silent, but only for a moment. Apparently the thing in the house didn't like people, because footsteps began to be heard from the ground floor. I would have thought it was my brother running late, but at no time was anyone heard to open the door. My dream quickly disappeared and I stayed tuned. The footsteps went slowly down the corridor. We even heard them going up the stairs, but only the first 5 steps. Then it went down, and it seems that he walked down the corridor again, because it was a sound that was moving away. Luckily that was the last surprise of that day, although we didn't sleep much either. What a great way to celebrate a birthday. Right. Are you afraid of old dolls or some childish-looking toys? Well, since was little I grew up in the atmosphere of terror thanks to my brothers. So I already knew the typical stories of possessed dolls, killer dolls, and everything related. The truth is that horror movies never scared me, because my brothers told me all the time that they were not real things. But when I got to that house, I no longer knew what to think. Everything saw in the movies no longer seemed so false. And the worst thing about this situation is that a distant aunt came up with the wonderful idea of coming to visit and bring us gifts. And what do you think she gave me? Yes, 3 old dolls. When saw them in the day, they made me very pretty and innocent. I did not play with them because I felt that I was no longer of the age to play with dolls, so I simply left them in their box and arranged them on a shelf in my room. When we were all at home, nothing extremely strange happened, except for some creaking sounds in the stairs and sensations that someone or something was watching us from behind. But things got bad when one of us was alone. That night I was alone. My mother began to work, only that her work, it was in the neighboring city, so she only on the weekend she returned home, and Uben was still at his night work by him, although every other night he was often stayed home with me. Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. That night was alone. Even though it was routine and I should be used to it, I was still not completely used to it, was still afraid of some things. By that time had realized that Mom's room was warmer and gave me more security than my room. So when I was alone, I slept there. Well, the thing is, I was until about 11 p.m. watching some children's movies to give myself the little courage and not think that something strange would happen. Then got sleepy, so turned off the television. I wrapped myself a little courage and not think that myself up a lot with the blankets and put music on my phone to help me sleep more peacefully. I would do it for at least an hour, since I set the timer for it to automatically turn off later. Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. And it worked. But not for much. Around 2 a.m. I woke up to some noises. I don't remember if I mentioned it before, but besides having insomnia, I suffer from light sleep. So even the song of a bird wakes me up. The thing is that those noises came from above, more specifically from my room. It was the sound of wood creaking next to a box being opened. Didn't want to think the worst, so I put music on my cell phone again to distract myself. However, the noises got louder. The wood creaked louder and the sound of the box was as if they couldn't open it and they were getting desperate. Suddenly all sound stopped. I calmed down for a few seconds until felt something fall, and immediately the music was heard coming from the wrists. It would be very cliché to say. It's weird because the dolls didn't have music. That always happens in movies, right? Well, my dolls had musical boxes on their chests, only the only way to make it sound was to pull a cord that was on their back, and well, nobody did. 3 o'clock rang and still don't understand how. I lowered the volume on the phone a bit, and dared to listen to all the noise from the room above. Small and slow steps were heard in addition to the typical music of children's toy. There will be no wood creaking or box will open. I still don't fully understand how the footsteps could be heard when walking if those dolls were light. It was as if it was a girl who was walking. God, couldn't stand all those weird things anymore. I was too scared, so much that I even started crying. Wanted my mother there to protect me, but she would not come. I couldn't stand it anymore, and it was so much the courage, fear and adrenaline of the moment that I shouted into the air, enough is enough. Whatever you are, leave me alone. Unbelievably, after that short sentence all noise stopped completely. There were no more footsteps or music or anything that came from my room. Even so, I did not stay calm and just cried until the dream and the headache made me sleep. Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. In the morning, when my brother arrived at house and the things calmed down, I dared to climb the stairs and enter my room to see if something had come out of its place. But no, the 3 dolls were in their box on top of the shelf and there were no signs that an attempt will be made to open their boxes. That same day I got rid of those dolls. I would not bear it all happening again one of those nights when was left alone. Since the night we saw the strange hand that leaned out of my window, we began to experience more strange things, and the worst thing is that they no longer only happened at night. If I remember correctly, this happened on a Saturday. My aunt and one of my cousins were visiting us because my mother had her birthday from her that day. It would be a somewhat quiet meeting and we would just be my brothers, me, my mother obviously, my aunt, my cousin, a friend of mom, my best friend and possibly the girlfriends of my brothers. But they would arrive almost at dusk, which is when the celebration would take place. While during the day, with my cousin, my brothers and my aunt, we would dedicate ourselves to ordering, cleaning, cooking and getting everything ready. From here I will relate the experience that my cousin had to live. She wanted to take care of all the kitchen. That is, cleaning and cooking. Well, we take care of the backyard after finishing tidying up inside, so she was left alone inside the house. It should be said that we never told her everything that happened in the house. She only knew that from time to time weird noises were heard, although she did not take it anyway since she was quite skeptical about the paranormal. But skepticism didn't do much good against that house. The first weird thing she told us she had experienced was, she had her back to the living room as she was washing the dishes, but she could see a man passing in the direction of the hall. She thought he was one of my brothers, so she asked him for help to carry some things. She asked him for help to carry some things back, but they did not respond or come back to help her. Confused, she took half of what she was supposed to carry and walked down the hall to the backyard. She saw the 4 of us while we continued cleaning. I asked the one who passed behind me for help and he ignored me. Which one of you was? She asked the only 2 men in the whole place. We were only left looking confused at the question. None of us have entered yet, replied my brother, Rohit. Don't be funny. I just saw someone passing this way out of the corner of my eye, she said seriously. She is not one of the most joking people out there, so she does not like to be joked. He really means it, I answered. This time we haven't entered. We've been here for a while. But tell me, did you hear the door open? Because at least I didn't hear anything. With that question, she kept thinking. Forget it, was the last thing she said before heading back to the kitchen. Remembering that day, she told me that when she entered again, she saw the same silhouette, only that this time she was going out towards the garden. She said that she followed him quickly to see who was making such silly jokes on her, but she didn't find anyone. She was alone in that part of the house. When she passed that, we heard her say, "Enough is enough." So loud that it seemed like a scream next to us, haha. Followed by that she appeared at the door leading to the backyard. I'm not going to take these stupid things anymore, she said angrily. If they want to scare me, they won't succeed. And I'm fed up, so you guys are going to finish the meal and I'll stay here ordering. We didn't want to make her mad even more, so my brothers had to go to the kitchen while we finished the decoration. Nothing else happened to her. I guess it was because she was no longer alone. Even she seemed like she was no longer angry about the supposed joke, since at one point she said that she would go get the cake for my mom in the kitchen. She did not want someone to accompany her. I guess they got bored of bothering me, so there must be nothing inside, was what she said before entering. Since the door had glass, we could look in, and that's what I did. I was worried since I knew very well what was going on in the house and prayed so that my cousin did not find anything more unusual. And good. If there was something strange. I noticed a somewhat tall silhouette that went from the living room to the kitchen. It was going in a straight line, and don't know very well if it was her clothes or her color, but I saw something beige. I was scared, but without telling the others, I went in to help my cousin. It only took me 2 seconds, but there was no one but her there. "Are you okay?" I asked when I saw her leaning on the dishwasher. "Tell me that you saw it too." She practically begged me for my answer to be positive. "And it is. I saw it. It did something to you." I hugged her. "Do not." "It approached me, but it got lost in the wall," she said, pointing to a specific place on the wall. "At least it didn't do anything to you, but did it speak to you? Did it make a gesture?" "Do not." Its face was blurry, but it looked angry. I thought it would hurt me. She began to sob while she clung to me more. The good thing is that it didn't do it. I tried to calm her down a bit, and since she didn't want to worry our family, she said that they had called her on the phone and that's why we had been late. She only told me about that experience because she felt that they would not believe her, but since I saw the same thing, she knew that she could count on me. At least appreciate that person did not hurt her. This time I will tell one of the strangest experiences that I personally lived in the house. I no longer remember what day it was exactly, but I do know that it was a weekday since that day in the morning I went to school. Well, first I will say that at that time I was angry with Rohit for a problem we had, so I did not speak to him for a few weeks. I make it clear because it is something important. Well, I was with a friend in a park after school until about 8 p.m. and then we went home. Being winter at that time, it was already getting dark, so I hurried since it was a bit far away. On the way, nothing happened to me, but when I arrived and spent a while in my room, I realized that I had not eaten for quite a while and I was getting hungry, so I took some money and hurried to go buy something now that the store was about to close. I just took my cell phone to take advantage of calling Mom and telling her that everything is fine at home. She was still working in the neighboring city. I didn't even turn on the lights when I went out, since at that time the paranormal things that happened at home did not surprise me. Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. Okay. I went back from shopping, closed the doors, and again walked down the hall without turning on the lights. At that moment I said to myself, be lazy. I'd better turn on the one on the second floor, and that's what I was going to do, besides having my hands full with bags and my cell phone on the right. I just stared at the screen of my phone while I was walking, and well, as I was not paying attention to the rest, I was not surprised when I saw the silhouette of Rohit passing by me. I just moved a little more to the right so as not to collide with him. We just brushed our arms, but as I said a moment ago, we weren't talking to each other, so just worried about turning on the second floor. However, there I noticed that the door did not open, and if I remembered correctly he should go that night to work. In a split second, I looked across the hall to see if he was there, but he wasn't. He hadn't gone to the kitchen. He hadn't gone to the bathroom. He hadn't come out. He wasn't even there. Wanting to be skeptical, I thought it was my idea or that he was scaring me. I looked towards the backyard anyway, as it was coming from that direction, but there was no one there either. I would be lying if I said that he didn't scare me at the time. Of course I felt fear and even felt a great shiver in my left arm, which was with the arm that we touched. Anyway, I wasn't going to be scared. I was too old for that. I just kept on my phone and locked myself in my room to eat a little and then sleep, since I was also supposed to go to school the next day. During my class period, the situation revolved in my head as I thought better of it and realized that I was alone all night. I still wanted to get rid of all the doubts I had, and I put my pride aside to ask Rohit if it was he who touched my arm the night before. I went to work at 7:30 p.m. was his answer from him. Why do you ask? I explained everything and he just laughed. Surely it was my twin. He laughed with that silly answer, but I just thought how thoughtful, and with a simple "we see." I went with my friend. It was not my imagination after all. I was a bit scared, but more than anything intrigued, since did not know that it was possible to have such a direct and strong contact with a presence, that is, you can hear, see and even feel the presence of something weird, but touching a ghost, I think was too much. At least it was the only time I experienced that. Shadows, noises, strange sensations, very cold in certain places, huge amounts of orbs in the courtyard, even brushing against a person. All that is what we got to go through with my family in the 4 years that we had already lived in this house. But what if I tell you that those events weren't the worst? Have you noticed that so far I have not mentioned my father? Well, now you know why. Rohit sometimes took his girlfriend at home to sleep, but it was almost always at night. That time it was different because they met when my brother left work at around 7 a.m. and he invited her home because, if I remember correctly, she had a fight with her parents and she had nowhere else to go to stay. Well, according to how she told us, they opened the gate and my brother ushered her in while he answered a call. She was already a part of the family in the house, so she just wandered into the garden until she noticed a tall man by the door. Kriti, as my sister-in-law is called, greeted him and he greeted her. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing with her hand for her to come in. "I'm going to talk to Rohit." She said that the man went out into the street, but she did not give it more importance and she continued on her way to my brother's room. At that moment I had already left home to go to school, so it was only them. But before that, according to Kriti, my brother arrived almost immediately. "What did that sir want to tell you?" she asked him, to which he just looked at her strangely. "Sir," he replied, "I mean the man who was at the entrance. He is your father. He is quite nice. Why haven't you introduced it to me before?" My brother looked at her confused again. "What man? In the house we are the two of us." "Don't kidding me. There was a tall man, with somewhat gray hair," she described it, to which Rohit was silent for a moment and then he looked through his drawers for a photo of him. "Was he?" He showed him a photo that I know well, where there is a somewhat robust man of 198 centimeters, brown skin, almost bald and gray. "Yes. He is your father. What did he tell you?" He asked without answering. "He greeted me, told me to come in, he said he should talk something to you and went out into the street." Now she was the one confused with the situation. "What is happening?" My brother showed him another photo. "It must be a joke," was all she said as he watched my brother cry. What was in the second photo? Well, it was one in which our father appeared at his wake from him, when we were getting ready to take him to the cemetery. And it is my father. The man my sister-in-law saw in the house was already deceased. That day I got home early as some teachers had been absent. It was around 12 p.m. when I arrived and I saw Rohit and Kriti in the dining room eating something. I greeted them, but they both just looked at me silently. "Is something wrong?" I asked. It was weird that they were silent, as they were very joking. "Something strange happened," she replied, and my brother let out a sigh. "What?" I asked again and he told me everything. I cried too when he finished telling me. And when I recovered a bit, I explained a little to him since my brother hadn't done it yet. "Our dad has been dead for almost 5 years, so it's impossible that you have seen him." "But I did see it." "Believe what she says," my brother finally spoke. She described the clothes he was wearing and it was the same one he was wearing the day he died. Besides, he had never told her about him. There was no way she knew what he looked like. I analyzed her response and she was right. She didn't get to know him. And we didn't talk about him because the situation was still difficult for us. Maybe he wanted to say that he is fine. He tried to encourage us. Perhaps his intention was to come so that you are no longer so sad. It could be an option. Sometimes people who pass away make one last effort to let their loved ones know that they are okay. In the same way we tried to leave that topic until there, since it was something quite delicate. This also counts as a paranormal experience and more for the simple fact that my father never knew the house we were living in. So how did he appear there? Since as far as I know, deceased people usually manifest themselves in the places where they lost their lives or places that they knew. To this day, that point seems strange to me. When my mother and brother returned home, I told them what had happened to me that night. They both looked at each other somewhat concerned, since they knew that I would not be able to invent something like that, and even less something that included my father. "This is already exceeding the limits," was what my mother said. "Is there anything we can do?" I asked, still sad and scared. I will try to contact the former owner to ask him if he knows anything, was Mom's reply, but you shouldn't worry anymore. At work they gave me a few weeks of vacation, so I will be here every day. That reassured me a lot, as it meant that I would no longer be alone at night. It was very good news. At least for the first week Mom was home, nothing paranormal happened. At last I felt that calm returned to the house, although I still had my doubt as to why would my dad manifest himself in this place. It was still strange, and at that moment I didn't know if it was a product of my mind or something else, but just because I was still thinking about Dad, the atmosphere in my room became heavy, as if there was a lot of negative charge in the air. Is rare. The same thing happens to me when I go in there, Mom answered when I told her about my concern. Do you want to remove your doubts? She asked me. You have to record. If there is something in your room, it should appear on a recording, and it would also be easier to know what all this is going on. I was not really happy with that proposal. I didn't want to find out that there was something in my room with me there, but if it was the best way to clarify everything, then I was going to do it. And that same afternoon Mom bought a tape recorder. It worked with a charger so it wouldn't turn off in the middle of the night. God, she was terrified, so much so that she didn't want night to come. I no longer felt safe in my room. You should be quiet. If I hear something strange, I'll go up right away. She tried to calm me down when it was time and just nodded while taking a long sigh. I put the tape recorder on my desk and then I lay down on the bed to try to sleep. Good night. Mom said goodbye, turning off the light, then closing the door and finally going down the stairs to go to his own room. Well, I have to admit that it was difficult for me to fall asleep, but I slept anyway since did not feel anything strange. And in the morning I woke up calmer, thinking that it had been a quiet night since not even Mom came up to see me. With those same positive thoughts, I turned off the tape recorder and got ready to go to school. I grabbed the tape recorder before Mom to check anyway when she woke up, while going downstairs, and put it on the table for Mom to check anyways when she woke up, and I just went to school. I returned home around 3 p.m. and the first thing I saw upon entering was my mother with a worried face. Did something happen? I asked, sitting next to her in the living room. Didn't you hear something last night? I denied. Was there something? I asked, pointing to the tape recorder in her hands. Listen. She said. I paid attention, and although for several minutes there was only silence, at one point the bed creaked as if someone were sitting on it. It was not me, since it was a different noise from the one I made when I moved in bed. Then another minutes of silence and again the creaking of the bed, but now footsteps were also heard. They were strong, as if he were a robust person. The steps were distinguished as if they were walking around my bed. A chill ran through my body when I heard the recording. I could not believe that during the night I did not hear anything and that there was something on the tape recorder. Still missing, Mom said, and it was true. After the steps finally stopped, there was a great noise that startled me. It was as if they had taken something really heavy and dropped it on the wooden floor without caring about anything, but that was already impossible. Because a noise of such magnitude would have awakened us both, and above all, there would be marks on the floor, but there was nothing. This must be a joke. I told Mom. It's another recording, right? I didn't think that happened in my room while I was there asleep. It's not a joke, nor is it a different recording, she said. It's what you recorded last night. And do not interrupt, that there is still something more. More, I asked. What else could there be? I had already heard too much. Or so I thought. For a few seconds there was silence until again those heavy footsteps and the creaking of the bed were distinguished. But the worst was not that. The worst thing is that voice that I knew very well sounded again, only this time it did not mention my name. Only a few groans of pain were heard and then more silence until the recording ended. Why him? I asked, almost crying. What is he doing here? I needed to know the answer. I don't know. My mother hugged me. But I will ask someone who knows about everything related to the paranormal. Somewhere there must be an explanation. I'm sick of this, I said angrily. I don't know what you want from us, but that's enough. I shouted into the air. Leave us alone, Dad. That moment anger and sadness overwhelmed me, and just shouting those words would take a load off my shoulders. Still, we needed quick answers, and we no longer had to wait for something else to happen. So after Mom comforted me, We went to some places where they could help us with the whole paranormal thing. And it was also necessary to find the former owner of the house as soon as possible. Surely he knew something, right? It took us several days, but we were finally able to contact the former owner of the house. Mom called him on the phone and told him a little about what was happening since the first day we started living in that place, and he only said that she would explain everything to him when she returned to the city. Apparently she had traveled. It took him 3 weeks to meet and get to our house to chat. He was too serious when Mom started telling him the whole story. First of all, they have been living here for almost 5 years now. There is no guarantee anymore. That's not what bothers us, Mom replied. We just want to know why these things happen here. Well, I guess it was my mistake not to have said it from the beginning. But he also feared. He feared that if he told him, he would never be able to sell the house. What happens? Before you got here, I rented the house to a couple. They seemed very nice and quite calm, but after a while the neighbors began to complain that these people made a lot of noise at night. They told me they heard strange screams and chants. I did not believe, and it was not my business, but the insistence of the people was so great that I had to come to verify. I did not see or hear anything strange at that time, but to get out of the doubt, asked the neighbor to call me as soon as she felt something strange. And well, that same night, around 2 a.m., she called me saying that screams and songs were heard again. I came as fast as I could so I could listen before it was all over. First I went into the house next door to make sure, and when there was a knock on the wall along with some screams, I got up my courage and hit the gate several times, but nobody opened it. I had to use the spare keys I had to get inside. In doing so, I wish I hadn't done it, since what I saw was somewhat disturbing. He paused and frowned. Maybe he didn't want to remember. When I entered, there were many candles in this place. He pointed with her finger in a circle where we were now sitting, around a pentagram, and they inside with a Ouija board. They looked at me surprised and angry. Maybe because I interrupted their ritual. They didn't even try to explain though. They just said a few words that didn't understand and stepped out of their circle. I was so amazed and terrified that I couldn't say anything either, and I just left for that night. He finished recounting. But what else happened? I guess they explained something later. Mom was getting upset, and I don't blame her, since I was in the same situation. That was too sensitive a subject, and all the information was withheld from us. Well, continued the former owner, after thinking and trying to assimilate everything, I came again, and luckily this time everything was normal. And by that I mean there were just no candles or pentagrams. Although they both looked at me like they wanted to kill me. I asked them for an explanation, but they didn't give it. They kept silent to every question I asked. I was even terrified because those people were no longer appreciated to whom rented the house. It was as if they were totally different. And well, I didn't get any answers, so I just told them they should vacate as soon as possible. Only there did one of them speak. Fine. But we won't leave empty-handed, was what she said when she was leaving me. At first did not understand, but when I returned after a week, I saw on the walls inverted swastika sign made with blood, strange marks on the floor, and in the backyard there was a circle made with candles and a letter inside that said, "The worst thing you could do it was to interrupt a ritual and kick us out. Now you won't be able to live in peace." I did not want to risk some misfortune happening, so I looked for someone who could explain to me what everything they had done meant, and incidentally to do a cleaning here to prevent it. It was a lady, who explained to me that they had made rituals and witchcraft here, surely so that things from beyond would manifest themselves. She said that the energy left here was too strong and that we could hardly reverse the situation. In the same way, I spoke with some priests so that they would bless the whole house. It cost a lot, but it had been achieved, and that is why I did not mention anything at the time of the sale of the house, because I trusted that everything had been solved. The guy finished his story, and we were just so amazed that we did not know what to say or think. "Anyway, I can ask you to bless the house again," he suggested. "No," was the curt answer of Mom. "This no longer has a solution. This thing, whatever it is, pushed the limits. He is pretending to be my husband who never knew this place, and that for us is already too much. We're not going to take this anymore, and worst of all, it's your fault." I don't think I ever saw Mom as upset as she was at that time. I am sorry. I'm really sorry was his simple apology. No, this can no longer be forgiven. You put people who had nothing to do with it at risk just because you wanted to sell the house and have money. If something more serious had happened to us, would you have been responsible? Maybe this thing could even hurt us and you didn't care. I demand that you solve it or at least give me back the money I paid for this place because I no longer intend to continue here risking something worse to happen. Okay, she had to reluctantly agree. But it will take a while. Well, but we will no longer stay here. Let me know when you have the money and we will go back to get our things. He just nodded and left. Tell your brother that we will stay at your aunt's house so that he can come and get some of her things, she told me, and I only managed to send a message to Rohit. You too, go pack clothes that we are leaving today. I nodded and went up to do it. It was a sudden order, but now that we knew the truth, it was best that we get out of there as soon as possible.